Jack Spade back here with you, High Noon Leatherworks, for another leather adventure. And today we're going to do a project that incorporates some wet molding and using it to create a double magazine pouch for a 1911 45 ACP. So come on in and let's get started. Alright, so the first thing I did was I took two 45 ACP 1911 mags, and I took me a piece of poster board and I laid them side by side, and I started measuring out where I thought I would have more than enough leather on the bottom, and when I'm done I'll trim all this out to where it looks nice. And this will end up being a multiple video, so there will be a part 1 and probably a part 2. So first thing I did was lay these out, measure, make sure I had plenty of room where I can wet form, because I want to stitch down the center too, so I want to split these apart so that I actually have a double mag pouch or holster, but I can open them up separately, but they'll end up being together, if that makes any sense. So my actual snaps and my cover flap will be separate once we're done. Then I transferred that onto my leather, and I'm using pre-dyed black. It's about 6 ounce, and then transferred that and cut that piece out. Then I transferred that to another piece of leather. I made it an inch wider than this piece, the back. This is my front, and I'm putting my finished leather, my finished side on the back and my finished side on this piece on the front. So when this flap comes over and snaps, that'll be finished. So you want to make sure you get those in the right direction. I got me a piece of wood here, big enough for everything to fit on. I cut this one. I laid the mags down on my back piece, just like I had on my pattern, like so. Then I laid this piece of leather, the top piece, on top of that to make sure I had plenty that's going to wet mold over those. And I can trim all this once I'm done. And then I want to double check to make sure that my flap's going to work okay. So what I want to do is take this piece, which is the top piece, and if you want to wrap your mags in some stretch wrap or something like that, you can. These are stainless steel, so I'm just going to go ahead and put my leather on top of them. I got a little pan of water here. I'm going to immerse that top piece of leather in that water. It's just room temperature, so it's probably about 73, 74 degrees maybe. And I'm just gonna keep working that up and down in that water until my piece of leather starts to soften up to where I can mold it. And you can tell once it starts softening up, you'll be able to, it'll be real pliable. It won't be hard. You won't fight it to try to bend it or move it around. And you can tell it's getting softer as I work that in there. And I'm just going to keep bending that a little bit. Remember, this was pre-dyed leather. It came black, so probably a little more stiff than what a regular veg tan leather would be. That was just normal, a natural color that hadn't been dyed or anything first. Okay, it's starting to finally get a little more pliable. So the first thing I'm going to do, I've got some clamps here. I've got some clamps and I've got some small short pieces of 1x4 or 1x material, different sizes. So I've got it cut to different lengths, and I'm going to use these clamps and use this backer to hold those clamps down to where I want my leather to be held. So let's go ahead and pull this out, kind of let it drain for a second, and let's see where we're at as far as, oh yeah, it's nice and pliable now. You can see it's not hard to bend at all. I'll wipe the excess water off of the surface on both sides because I really don't want it dripping anywhere. So I'll just wipe the excess off of both sides, lay it down on top of my mags where I want it, and I'm just going to center this. So I've got about a 1/2 inch of my leather on the top hanging off of each side because I cut it 1 inch wider than my back piece. I'm going to move this water so it's not in my way and I don't accidentally spill it. And then I'm going to take my first piece of 1x, and the reason I want to wet form it between the two mags is because I'm going to stitch it between there. That'll give me 2 compartments. And what I want to do is make sure that I only bring this down to the bottom, this piece of wood that I'm going to use as a clamp. I only want to bring it down to the bottom of the mags. I don't want to go past that this direction toward me. And then I'm going to push that down, and you can see how with the mags being there how it wants to push this top piece up, and that's okay. Double check, make sure I'm just at the bottom of that, which I am. Then I can go ahead and take one of my clamps, slide this bottom board toward me, put my clamp on there, and then clamp it down. Now, something I noticed about this short board, my clamp doesn't go in very far, so it wants to pull the board toward me. So it just found out that board's going to be way too short. So what I need to do is replace it with a longer board. That's why I had several of them out here. Because I want one that is going to be able to be clamped on each end. And again, I just want this end toward me just to be at the bottom. Now I could go ahead and put my clamp at the end. And then I can spin it around and put another clamp at the other end. And I do have this marked with some painter's tape as the top. I've got several different types of clamps here. Alright, so there's my first board clamped down in the center where I'm going to put my stitches down through the center. Then what I want to do is I'll turn this 90 degrees so that I have it where I can pull the leather back toward me, toward that piece of wood, push my magazine against that, then fold that over, kind of mold that. Remember, it's still wet, so I'm going to mold that around there. Take another 1x and put it on the edge, and then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to put a clamp on each end, and that will smash that down and hold that right in the middle. So there's my magazine right inside here. So I've got a board on each side of that. That's already molding that. I'll turn it 180 degrees. Do the same thing on the other side. Pull that toward the center. Fold it over my second magazine. Mold that to the magazine the best I can with my hands. And then see if I can get my clamp to fit in here. It isn't a very wide clamp. That one's not going to fit. Let me get a different one here. Got another one of these expandable clamps that are great for that. So I'm going to turn that around, put that back on my workbench so I can push and mold that back before I put my board on. Then I'm going to use that on the long side. And you end up getting all these clamps on here. You can build a mold out of wood and cut you a mold for this. The problem is, if you're just going to make one of them, it's very, very time consuming to do it just for one. And I do have a video for making a mold for a cell phone case for wet molding. So you could go back and search that and check that out if you want to see how I did that and make a male and a female mold, put them together. So the next thing is I got to come up with one more clamp to finish this end. So the only clamp I have left is a large C-clamp, which any kind of clamp will work. So I'll put that on this end, and that'll finish up my clamps for my wet molding on the sides. And you can see it ends up being quite the apparatus with all the clamps and everything on it. But once this dries, it will be a really nice molded magazine holster, which you'll see. Then on the ends here at the bottom, you can see I could have done the bottom first and then, but I would have had to have more clamps like this, and I just don't have any more. So what I'm going to do to the bottom to pull it down and wet mold it is I'm going to lay this on its side like so. You can see I got a lot going on here. Then I'm going to take these larger spring clamps, and I've got some smaller spring clamps, and I'm going to take, I don't want any of these little clamp teeth or jaws making any marks in my leather since it's wet. So I'll take a small piece of scrap leather and I'll put it across here to put my clamps on. That way you won't see any markings or anything, and that'll still hold that down. So I'm just cutting a piece of scrap black leather, the same that I cut my magazine material out of. I'm going to slide that in here with the finished side down. Then I can go ahead and put my clamps on there. I'm going to put it to the outside first with a large one. Then I'm going to go to the inside with a small one. And if you can get it, and these do fit, if you can get it over the board on the back, that makes it even better. And then you just want to make sure that they're flat, that they flatten out. And you can do that by pulling these handles away from each other, spreading those out. And it looks like I'm hitting the clamp on the back. There we go. And then I'll put my last small clamp on there. I think I've lost one of my jaws. So there's all my clamps. I've got my magazines in there. I don't know if I can turn it. There's the magazines right here, the two metal objects. So both sides have been clamped. The center has been clamped. and the tail has been clamped. So a lot of clamps, but what that'll do is that'll save me massive time two ways. Not to have to build, and it would take probably several hours or a couple of hours to build a mold for this. If I was going to make hundreds of them, I'd just build a mold and be done with it. That way you could make them real quick. But if I'm just making a one-off like this, I can just use these 1x4 pieces and my clamps that I have, and it does look like a massive undertaking, but you can see this is real-time video, so it didn't take that long. But what it does is it'll do the same exact thing as a mold would do, but with a lot less time involved. So I'll let this sit, room temperature 70 to 74 degrees for at least 2 to 3 hours before I take those clamps off, and then that will be our next video. I will have removed the clamps, and we'll be back on the next video next week, and we'll show what the results are, and I'll show you how I'll finish that. So that'll be part 2. So there's the magazine pouch or magazine holster, the double one, wet molded, setting in the mold that I made just out of clamps and pieces of scrap 1x laying around. So we'll let that set. As I said, I'll pull that out somewhere between 2 to 3, 4 hours after I let that set and dry room temperature, and then next week I'll show you how I'm going to finish that. So come on back, check out the next video. I appreciate you watching, and please, like I always say, like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.